really been useful.
Let me preface my comments with a statement of qualifications. I've been in and around local government for about 20 years. I was at state government at the cabinet level in a big state. And then I was a consultant dealing with government, and in the consulting business, they used me as a kind of a specialist in organization. And form and structure of government has been not only a career business, but a hobby of mine as well. So I've watched everything that's gone on in the United States over years with great interest in the experiments and the concepts and those that went into existence and were tried and those that failed. So I could not go through all of this without developing some views. Now, in expressing those, I think I would like to start out by pointing out, strictly in an institutional setting, some pitfalls that are written all over, as I see it, the structure that was presented in the first draft. And my main concern is that it institutionalizes the downgrading and weakening of the legislative structure. You have a strong mayor who's a chief executive with veto power, and he appoints his chief administrative officer and all department heads, and they serve at his pleasure. Now, what you've done in this is to create a governor. This is the governor of the little state of Anchorage. But you've given him more power than the governor has, than any governor has, because a governor who has these same powers is held in check by an organized, ongoing, working political party. This governor, in this charter, is not held in check in any ongoing sense by anybody or anything. So it's a position of extraordinary power. It creates a cabinet system so that the individual who occupies this position could, as governor, have complete turnover at the top level of the government. And I think that built into this also is institutionalizing frequent turnover of top staff people. And this is obviously surely true of the manager or chief administrative officer, who has to be the mayor's alter ego.
This is whenever a new mayor is elected.
Right. Right.
We had that when Roderick was elected.
Now, all of this raises the specter of powerful pressures to reward political supporters with these jobs. The person you call manager, which to me tends to be somewhat of a misnomer. And I would think of him as the chief administrative officer under the mayor. Because the mayor is the manager. He is the chief executive officer. But this other person, to function well, has got to be the mayor's boy. He's got to be the alter ego. It's a very powerful and insulated position. And and it's unreachable by the public. It's sort of a faceless kind of a thing, and yet this person, because the mayor's going to be so busy doing what he ought to be doing, this person is going to sit astride an operating budget of about $100 million from day one, operating budget, and exercise executive authority over more than 2,000 employees. In an institutional sense, I reacted to this structure as seeing it place the mayor, no matter who he is, deliberately place the mayor in an adversary role vis-a-vis the legislative body. Now, I don't know whether you've thought about it in this sense or not, but whoever is running the administration of the government, who has the executive authority, receives and controls at least 90% of all the facts. I work for the city council as a whole, so, I feed it to them. What is built into this system, where you have the mayor taking a strong position with the legislative body, and the executive branch is in control of all the facts, there is a human tendency to give the legislature only those facts which support the mayor's position. You follow me? Now, this has happened in state legislatures. The bureaucracy dominates the legislature to a degree that a number of the more progressive legislatures have had to hire their own staffs. And I can see that happening here in this adversary relationship which is built into the system. I'm really saying I see it as an imbalance of power. And if I were to give you just a brief statement of overview, my reaction to this is that it sharply tips the scales towards executive domination and institutionalizes a weak legislative arrangement.
We've been told by various people who've spoken to us that this friction that we are building in, and we recognize that, is good. That the one branch beating heads against the others serves the people better because two viewpoints are more sure to come out. That's the one thing that disturbs me about the setup of the strong mayor, is that I haven't liked the friction that has been in the borough.
If that's your goal, leave it the way it is, because we've got beautiful friction between the two governments. They watch each other constantly.
Some people have told us that. Some
And if
people
that's the
have said,
goal, if
"Don't
that's what you
like
want
that.
to achieve, leave it exactly the way it is.
It's an awful way, though, to have a government with that kind of a strain. I don't particularly subscribe to this business about, Big Brother's watching under this arrangement.
It's a weird set of values that says conflict is good.
Yeah, it is. Conflict is not the answer to government.
Conflict is inherent in government.
I know it is, but it's not the answer to anything.
But whether you want to institutionalize it is a key question.
Yeah.
Now, what about removing a manager who may not be serving the public adequately? How effectively can a legislative body get together and change managers?
I mean, under the manager system, what happens all the time.
What to do, we know.
Doesn't the answer to that depend somewhat on the rate of possible turnover in the legislative body?
Well, this is my next question that I was going to get to, and we've had people tell us that if we set up a council manager forum, we ought to set up a legislature that turns over all at once. 2-year terms and everyone comes up for a vote at once.
That's terrible.
Or at least half instead of a third or something.
Yeah.
Hi, Frank. Government is becoming an extremely complex thing. And, you know, I sat down the other day with the active board. Every one of those guys is new. Now, if you want to create a situation where the bureaucracy really dominates, then do that.
Well, just watching the commission try and get its feet under itself and begin functioning, there's such a lag before you really understand what's going on, before you can really come forward.
Jim, saw you on the stage the other day. Which time?
As Cinderella, with his twinkle toes,
No, it's typecasting.
What about the representation on the legislative body as far as districting is concerned? Do you have any thoughts?
I don't have strong views on that. I have tended to feel that if you go strictly from a district or a ward or whatever you want to call it, that you do tend to generate parochial feelings and expressions. In the earlier history of city government, as all of you know, the ward system was a source of deep evil. I think we've come a long ways. But I also feel that a legislative body needs representation on it, people who are voted for by all of the people. I tend to prefer a combination. You know, in all of my experience and my liking of government and thinking about it and seeing it and being a part of it, I always seek out arrangements which provide balance.
We've been told that the strong executive elected mayor sort provides the check and balance in a balanced system. You're the first person that I've heard say that it's unbalanced in favor of the executive. Everyone else has said it sets up a good balance between the two branches that's lacking in the council manager.
I haven't seen, where is your balance?
Well, the veto.
Let's say I'm the mayor. I control the departments. I name the department heads. And they're my people, and they work for me politically and otherwise. I control 95% of all the information. I give the legislature that information that I want them to have in support of my position. Where is the balance?
Well, the legislature controls the money. But I suppose then the only way they can get back at the administration is by withholding funds from a department as a punitive measure, which doesn't serve anyone very well. We had that in the borough happen with the department in Burnham always. When the legislature got mad at the department and couldn't get at the department head because he was, the mayor's appointment, they started chopping back the budget.
Doug, you made a point before these two gentlemen came in, which I think is worth pursuing a little bit, particularly since they haven't had the benefit of the statement that was made. But Doug made the statement that the way we have this charter set up and the powers that we have provided a strong mayor, we have given him more powers than the governor has.
Oh, political
that
reasons.
these two gentlemen needed to be just.
But no, it's a point, it's something that I didn't quite, it hasn't quite struck me, and I'm surprised somebody else hasn't picked that up. But how do you, to probe that a little bit, how do you see that he has more power than the governor?
Because what you have drawn here is a partisan political system attempting to keep the base nonpartisan. The governor is in a partisan political system. He is constantly watched by the opposition political party. And they are professional governor watchers. And they measure every mistake, and they're ready to chop the hatchet and all that kind of stuff. In this thing, you've created the powers of the governor without any check.
That's interesting.
Now, Roderick and Donahue, when they spoke to us the other day, said that the strong executive mayor is the coming trend in government, that more and more governments are turning over that from the council manager form. Is that just using statistics on one side of the question, or I mean, is it a swing that's going to happen and then swing back, do you think, after a few years when people discover the problem?
Well, I don't know what the trend is, because
I think the second part to that was, I wasn't present, but I'm just adding something that I heard, that in a stable community, the council manager type of government seems to survive and is more readily adaptable, but in a growing or progressive community, the executive form, the strong mayor form, seems
That
to
was another thing they said.
that was the parallels that brought in with it. Now, how do you relate to that, Doug? I mean, how do you see that?
I think there's an element of truth in it. There's just no absolutes in this business that we're tinkering with here. And there are situations in which there's no question that you need strong executive leadership. But let me address this question, and this might surprise you a little. This is the first time I ever worked in a situation with a full-time mayor. The classic idea was that your mayor would be part-time and he would be whomever, usually an established, distinguished person who would devote some of these times to civic leadership. I have tended, as I have worked here in this, for me, a new setting, to increasingly feel that the blending of a full-time mayor along with a full-time city manager is a very wise course in a place where things are really going on. I've talked with other managers from larger places, the Tucsons and Cincinnatis and so on. And their mayors, by charter, are not full-time, but in practice they're full-time and don't get any pay for it, so to speak. But these are full-time jobs. For example, if you lay out a mayor as full-time and you enunciate some roles for him, and I can just lay off a few. First is policy leadership, and this thing that you're talking about, and in the present sense, Sullivan does this very well. Okay. There's the job of intergovernmental relations, or what I would call external representation, which is a very important and time-consuming job. ceremonial, which goes on and on and on. The lobbying at other levels of government for your own best interests. All kinds of community promotion. And running the council sessions and so on. But in a large sense, the mayor in a place that is really burgeoning could very well be called Mr. Outside. Now, whoever is, and believe me, it is full-time plus. Just these things that I've laid off. Now you turn to the inside, where by any standard you're talking about a huge business operation. In terms of combining the operating budgets of the city and borough, you're talking $100 million a year. On top of that, your capital outlays. Big operation, complex, diversified, requiring some degree of continuity, certainly professional skill. Whoever is in charge of this is Mr. Inside. Now, you may have observed that in my tenure here, there hasn't been, so far, any personal controversy which has surrounded me. When I came to this community and observed, and I'm giving you some of my own philosophy here, and observed the political leadership to be ongoing and aggressively handled, and no void of any kind, that it was clearly my job to run the inside of the thing. I've got a big, big business over there. That's the way it's done. Add one other point you might find interesting. When one reads about ombudsman, a concept which I have always wondered to whether there lies therein more fiction than truth. And particularly when you recruit a very young person who doesn't know anything about the complexities and get a lot of publicity on this and all that. Do you know who the ombudsman in the city of Anchorage is? The mayor. And that's where it ought to be. Now you add all of these jobs that I'm talking about, to the job of mayor, and you have a big full-time operation. Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside. It's a great combination. Hi, everyone.
How are you?
I take it from your comment and that,
Do you know?
good. I take it from your comment and that's a point well taken.
We're not here.
Point well taken that the mayor is the ombudsman.
Logical.
As such, there is no need for an ombudsman.
So a mayor gets elected because he's known throughout the community. Usually people have known him 20 years. They get a problem, who should they go to? Somebody sitting in a lonely office, recruited yesterday? No way.
Good point. Take that a step further. How about these community councils? How do you view those?
The way you've got it written here? Pandora's box.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid of it. I really.
How about as advisory community councils? We've had a lot of, quite frankly, I think the idea of sharing rights and powers was a trial balloon that we set up because several commissioners felt rather strongly
Mary
about it.
Conley and Lisa. The do-gooders. It's the do-gooders.
No. We won't have any personal
Do-gooder.
personal characterizations, but I mean, it doesn't have to be written into the charter as something that has power.
I think all you should
Taken away
say
from
is
the legislature.
that they should have such duties as the legislature may from time to time prescribe by ordinance, period.
I think, Sherry, what we're doing, we're kidding ourselves, because first of all, it sounds good on paper. When it comes to actually creating these community councils, you're not going to have the people nor the enthusiasm. You're going to have the 2 or 3 that always show up at various things, and they're going to try and organize themselves.
You and me and
That's right. It isn't going to work. It isn't going to work. You're not going to get everybody organizing a community council and running around.
I certainly don't think it's your intent to unify the government and instantly fragment it all over the place.
it scares me.
I think what happened, Doug, is a couple of people on the commission wanted to do that thing, and I think the rest of us probably bought it because we thought that we were appeasing certain peoples outside of the city that might not vote otherwise for unification. But while we were letting ourselves be led down that trail, we forgot about all of the people that want unification and were going to vote in favor of unification. All of a sudden at the public hearings you're bringing up what are you doing, just what you said just now, we're beginning to fragment the government. So we were trying to do what other charters have done and failed, is we were trying to be too much to everybody, and when we all campaigned for election on the fact, I think every one of us said to a T that we're just going to write a bare bone charter, we're not going to try to appease everybody for it. Try not to put something in the charter for everybody. And I think we have started to do this, and I'd like for that to appear in the minutes if you're going to have minutes of this.
It's on, Bill. It's on.
And you'd like it in bold type.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm...
Well, Bill, you know, following your trend of thought, I too had my mixed emotions about it, but I thought we'd let it go in there to see what kind of reaction we got on the first draft. And I don't see anybody doing hoops in Girdwood, where I thought, you know, the people would embrace this thing with open arms. The people in Girdwood were very, very distant on the whole thing. They said, oh, yeah, sure, but they dropped it, and it isn't being embraced. It's a do-gooder type thing that fits in with the native thing, and, you know, the consumer and the vigilantes are going to get after this stuff. But the more I see of it, the more I question whether we should put it in there. I really do.
I've had some direct experience in the South Division, and I don't think it's functioning very well there, from my standpoint. We don't know when anything's going on, and we don't approve of what has gone on, particularly ourselves. And we got notice of one meeting by phone the night before that we didn't know they even had a community council before that.
Well, the present setup has some problems. Tudor Park, with only 40 houses being set up as a community council, is not anyone's idea of a community. 40, I thought.
But, well, that's what led me to believe that my neighborhood meets the definition.
All 5 of
Set
them.
up, yeah, all 5 of us. We are separated by major arterials, by Northern Lights Boulevard, by Lake Otis, and we're the only 5 residents in the area. We are surrounded by public lands institutions, Raider, May, Wester, and Wickman and Wilkins. Well, we'll take Wickman and Wilkins, but they're really not in our neighborhood. No, they're crosses on a major arterial into so, you know, these are kind of niggling points that add to my discomfort. I'd like to ask
25 after 12.
what he thinks in terms of size of the legislature. We had present around 11. At one point, we had 10 single and 3 at large for 13. We got uncomfortable with that. Excuse me. We had someone testify last night that we just aren't looking at it straight if we don't, when we have one group in existence now with 11, another 9, that's 20. Why don't we add one more and make 21?
But that would shorten the meetings, which doesn't make
Well, he
any
suggested we
logical
go to
sense.
the committee system if that's and I really don't know on the national scene what numbers are workable numbers under what kind of a setup. And maybe you have some observation.
Yeah, they splatter all over the place. For example, there are more than 3,000 counties in the United States. And as I remember, about 70% of those have 3 members on their Board of Supervisors. Some of these counties are very large. Cities also range all over the place. And, Evanston, Illinois, which is not a big city, has 18. And most of the operations range from, I think, 7 to 11.
Doug, in those places that have a large number, like 18 or so, do you have any knowledge or experience with the use of committees or panels in some sense to subdivide the work? We've heard some talk about this process. I don't understand it really exactly how it works myself, but I wonder if you
I
had
don't
any
think the
thoughts.
guy that explained it understood it either.
Well, but maybe Doug. Yeah, so,
Well, you could have identify a number of standing committees, and, finance, parks, the major functional areas. When matters come in, they're referred to that committee, and the committee reports back, and so on.
well, that was my question, I think, was whether the full body always had to ratify committee action, or whether these committees or panels could have a fair amount of autonomy in dealing with.
I'll tell you, it was very useful in the holding of public hearings, because where you have a big, complex governmental operation and lots of public hearings built into the process, you really impose a tremendous burden on the full body by requiring their presence at all these public hearings. And this does facilitate the conduct of business where 3 or 4 representatives of the body can hold a duly constituted public hearing and get the record and make the report. That, I think, would tend to facilitate the conduct of governmental operations on a large scale.
Does it ever allow, though, the people who make the major decisions of familiarity with what they're deciding? We've found that where a committee does something, the committee really has to pretty much explain to the whole body in full everything that they did before the other people feel confident to make a decision.
Not feel confident, they feel left out, and then you have to drag them along, and we've seen it operate even within the commission here.
Tremendous
Someone
waste
has
of
done all the
time.
work, and you have to do it all over again.
Waste of
The full
time.
body just to-
But, I don't think that has to be that way, and lots of, I don't know, I'm just thinking of Alaska Visitors Association, that's a 24-man board of directors, and we have subcommittees, and the subcommittees do their work, and then we our board meetings now are 3 times a year, 5 hours each, and they used to last for days, because the committee reports are good and they're precise and they're written out, and you read it, you get it in advance, and you do it, you know, and you can't always be in on every dot of the I, you know.
Well, the charter would be silent on a question like that anyway.
I would think so.
Probably, yes. The only thing that we would have to speak to would be the size, and if you have 7 people, it doesn't really facilitate a committee system.
Sounds pretty small.
Yeah, no, I don't think we ever considered fewer than 11, but we've considered, I think, between 11 and 15 at the most. Probably the biggest choice would be between 11 and 13.
I think we had 13
Yeah.
in our discussion.
Doug, and you glad you
Oh,
finished.
I was just going to ask about a mix between single-member representation and at-large representation on the legislative body. Does that function properly?
As far as I know, various places are experimenting with different things. And the reform movement in government sought to strike down the district or ward system because of the evils that had developed in it, and the parochial viewpoint, and the trade-off of votes. If you'll vote for this thing in my district, I'll vote for something in yours, which in the larger places turned out to be pretty bad news. Reform movements always, the pendulum always goes, way over in the other extreme. So the reform movement said it's all got to be pure, and everybody has to stand at large and stand before the. There needs to be pressures to represent the community of the whole.
Some people argue that that's the mayor's job.
No, you need it in that legislative body too.
The legislative body has to do it too.
So I favor the mixture, and where you would have single representation districts, and you would have, some places have said that tried it different ways. You stand from an election, a single district, you're voted on by everybody. Yeah, so
We should probably tell you that we had, in one instance on the commission, we had a mixture of single-member districts and at-large.
10 single-member and 3.
9 and, I think, yeah, it was 9 and 3 or 9 and 4 or something like that. 10 and 3. Was it 10 and 3?
there just aren't any absolutes, and people have tried all kinds of different things.
Doug, down to a hairy situation on these utilities. What's your thoughts there? When we unify, how would you treat, what do you feel the treatment should be of these facilities as far as spreading the assets and the debt?
Well, first of all, I think that what you've got in your charter is very detrimental to the passage on this thing, because there are lots and lots of people who within the city, and this will be widely discussed, I'm sure, if the language stays the same, who feel, whether right or wrong, that they're being financially taken. And this will, in my judgment, create an area of controversy around this charter, which the effort can ill afford. Now, I tend to feel that the whole utility question is an extremely complicated thing, not only on division of assets and liability, the identification of them, and the analysis of who gets what, but how they're going to be structured within the government. We've talked about this before. Charter Commission can't make those decisions. Now, I tend to feel that the Charter Commission should sidestep this altogether and should write in here in the transition that as a part of the transition, they would be called into existence a special blue ribbon ad hoc kind of commission, panel or whatever, which would have the task of within a 6-month period of conducting studies and making recommendations on division of assets and liabilities and on the structure of how they would relate in the structural
We
system.
did have that in there originally, no? What the hell? Why did we take it out?
There are certain statements in Title 29 that specify part of it.
Well,
Have you read those?
part of it, Rick could probably.
Well, the main thing that the statute says is that you have to leave bonded indebtedness incurred with respect to sewer, water, and roads in the area that originally incurred it. As to everything else, assets or liabilities can be spread as far as the statute is concerned.
And that we must, in the charter, address the question of assets and liabilities.
Yeah. Now,
But would such a panel
yeah, I agree.
satisfy?
I think so. I mean, the requirement to address something is about the
Take the question of sewers as an example. The city people, over the years, built up a system of sanitary sewers and floating bonds and all that sort of thing. And that debt is still being paid off. And the city, I guess, owns the sewers in the city. So we're paying taxes on those sewers. In addition,
May I answer you? I was under the impression that the assessments that are still being collected were covering those payments, that you were not paying them in taxes. Now, have I been given this information?
I'm sure the assessments play a big picture in that area.
I was under the impression that the assessments covered all of it, that you are not presently paying taxes to
The
cover it.
degree to which the assessments cover, I don't know.
I know that the borough agreed that they would be perfectly willing to take over the sewers with the one way or the other, but the city wanted to keep ownership so that they could keep getting the assessments because they were greater than that yet to be paid.
Okay, let me check that out. That's a good
No, please don't pass that out as fact.
All right, I promise.
Thank you. That's the very reason the city wanted to keep the ownership, is because there was more assets than there were liabilities left.
I'll determine that.
At any rate, we had at one point put in here such a group as a transitional measure. And I personally don't feel confident to do that as a commission without hiring a consultant.
Well, that was the point in having that group. I remember we wrote that, and I wrote the thing and put it in there. I remember that. I agree, and this was per our discussions that we've had, that probably this is the way to do it.
if a commission, excuse me, interrupting you.
No, go right ahead.
If a commission were assigned this job of deciding who gets what sort of guidelines or principles do you think they should use in making that decision? I mean, it would seem to me that they would have to have some kind of feeling for the policy they were to apply in doing that.
Well, the asset and liability thing may be more straightforward, but I just don't know. Through the law.
Well, I think the commission would have to first determine the constraints that they'd have to work under by the statutes, if there are any that cover something like this. And then it becomes just a question of pure economics. I mean, forgetting the politics and everything else, you're dealing with assets and you're dealing with liabilities, and you got one further thing that you're dealing with here, which comes to the forefront very quickly, and that is the people in the borough have a feeling that they've been using, let's take the telephone system, that they've been using the telephone system low these many years, And as such, they have an ownership in it. I mean, this is the feeling they've developed. They've paid for it, although they've never gotten a return. The city's always reaped the benefit. The profit from the use of those telephones in the borough has accumulated to the city and not to the borough. So the people in the borough do feel that they have some sort of an ownership stake in this thing. So when you say to them, well, we the city own this, they're going to dispute it very hot and heavy. They're going to say, the hell you do? Well, we paid for it. So these are the things we're going to get into. It's going to be pure economics that's going to have to settle it, not politics. And it's going to have to take somebody that...
But it's funny, you know, like the statute sidesteps the question really when it says that debt after unification remains the debt of the area which contracted it unless the assembly determines that the asset was used for the benefit of the larger area or will be so used after unification, you know, that sort of principle.
But I agree that the charter could not solve the utility question other than just to give the parameter, the broad stroke of who should do it.
You know, you think that panel would be acceptable to city voters? I just wonder what options you have. Well, to take the question of whether the telephone utility will be a department of the new government, as it is now, I have grave questions as to whether that's the way to run this telephone utility as a part of the general government process. The same is true with the electric light and power.
And what you'd want to do is set it up like an authority, telephone authority, like a port authority.
Some semi-autonomous kind
Yeah.
of arrangement.
Well, Doug, as it operated now within the city, and with the telephone and the electrical utilities financially are separately set forth, is that right?
Yeah.
And they report to the council results. And to a certain extent, they have been having to come to council for approval of bids and so forth, for 5,000 or 25,000, whatever it might be. To what extent does that occupy council's time doing what I consider an administrative job?
They're occupying a great deal of time.
Is it at all necessary or wise for that to be in
Well,
that?
see, those are the questions I'm raising. There are two things that I can pinpoint very quickly. First of all, the utilities are in a very strong growth period, as all of you know. The telephone company has doubled the number of telephones in the last 5 years and will double again within the next 5 years. We're having great difficulties dealing with the utility as a part of the governmental process in terms of personnel. A company this big in the lower 48 would be paying its manager $60,000 to $65,000. We're looking for a manager now. We're having real trouble because the manager is the third level in the administrative hierarchy. But I foresee that this problem is going to increasingly plague us, and I think the personnel system has to be distinct and competitive in the telephone with the telephone industry. The other thing that we're having trouble with, I think I mentioned this when I chatted with you before, we are applying as a department of government, correctly so, we are applying such things as our normal purchasing procedures to the telephone company. And these were designed over the years to prevent collusion and criminal acts and so on. And they work very well when you're buying a truck or something of that kind. We're in the business now of buying this tremendously complicated sophisticated electronic equipment. And so we're having trouble applying these same standards. So the other companies will set up expert panels and they'll look at these things, and not only they look at cost, but how the stuff will fit in and interact with the equipment that they have. And in some cases, they'll buy more expensive equipment because it'll be cheaper to operate over the years. And so well, we get hung up on the lowest, and all this kind of thing. Then the vendors come before council and they say, "No, mine is best," and nobody knows what they're talking about. So it's become a problem.
Well,
Is that what happened when you got the original telephone equipment? I understand that they went out on these last go-around that they got the equipment and a great quantity. They went out and talked to the ACS and tried to find out which equipment would stand up and last. They told them which ones would and which ones wouldn't, so they said turned around and bought the ones that said it wouldn't.
well, the other tragic part of that thing is once you're committed to a system like the city buys Stromberg equipment,
Then you're in it.
forget your bidding because
You're in it.
that's
the
it.
time
You're tied to that brand. I mean, you can't continually change brands. It's ridiculous.
Well, setting up a panel is going to beg the question in putting off to a later date a problem that is pretty vital both to the whole community. And I feel that if the panel is set up, this damn near ought to set some parameters, maybe pretty broad ones, but some parameters for the operation of that panel. Because personally, I feel very strongly that the utilities should be operated as a business entity. I still feel that council and assembly both are getting into far too much administrative work and not policy decisions. If council and assembly have nothing left to do because they've set such good policies, it's working fine. I think that'd be great. I think when we place the utilities in the hands of a new governmental body, I think we ought to set at least the broad parameter of saying it shall be operated as a separate department, as a business entity, and policies for that business entity will be handled by the board of directors known as the assembly, and they will not get into administrative detail. I don't know how you do it, but that's what I feel.
Well, it was brought up last night pretty clearly, and I don't know. I mean, the Charter Commission should probably address itself to cause a guideline to actually happen on utilities. But we're not experts in utilities, and if we were, we would be out in the utility business. So we don't have experts hired on our side to do this for us. So you're probably right. Maybe some panel or some method of in the transitional period. But the problem really is, and we might as well talk about it, is that if I got $160,000 utility and worth 160, and I only owe 110 on it, that means it's worth 50 million. And I've got 50 million coming. And so I might be willing to spread out my system among everybody in the borough, but I'd like some of them profits back. Because that's how we've kept the taxes down $3 or $4 mills may be in the city of Anchorage is because the profits going back to the general fund. So that, and I'm just trying to paint myself as if there is one, as an average citizen in the city of Anchorage who says proudly, why don't we need to get back, we either need to get back those profits if we're going to be a service area to keep our taxes down. Or maybe maybe the cash injected into the end of these utilities over the year on a broader base will help make them better and make our investment stronger. Something has to happen there, but I don't know if we can do it, you see, as a commission. Something has to happen there to ensure that 60 or 70,000 people that live in the city, that they're not, gotta be so they don't feel like they're getting ripped off. And I don't think there would be anyway, but I think that you gotta make it appear, and there has to be something there so that they're not gonna be feeling like they're losing the store.
That they be guaranteed that their business investment is paid off, amortized in some fashion.
Yeah.
And I understand the protest in this regard. The phone company is clear. The problem with the other utilities, like electricity, is the fact that indeed I, as a city resident on city power, am still paying for Chugach's things through a general tax base from the federal government, low interest loans and what have you. And it's a little more subtle. But I'm paying for Chugach loans and things with low interest loans just as much as in other ways. And
I think it's things that you get used to doing, Frank, and like I pointed out one night at a charter commission meeting a long time ago, we weren't getting our streets paved, Doug, a long time ago. The city was matching dollar for dollar to pave the street, and we were matching the city out of business, and so I was on the planning commission, we imposed a ruling that if you wanted your street paved, you paid 100% of it. But the city didn't go out and bond, and now we just paid for over a period of 10 years, all of a sudden the streets started to get paved in all the communities within the city. And now people are driving and turning it on my goddamn street, the one I paid, that I paid 100% of. But I got over that, and I'm not mad about it anymore. So I think it's how things are going to happen on down the road. You're going to pass these things along,
Bill, what would be wrong as part of unification to sell all these utilities? Now, we sell them all. We get a nice return for them. We pay off the indebtedness.
You're talking about two only.
All right, the city has now a tax base on these utilities. They're doing real well, so the city's going to reap a tax without having to put all this labor and everything else in the electric. What's wrong with that? Let's turn them over to industry where they belong. Get them out of the city's hair.
And if they will be taxed
That's right, they'll be taxed as a going utility, as a business.
This comes into the area that we didn't want to do in the charter, which was rocking big boats.
Well, we may have to rock the boat, though, because we're going to get it rocked the way we're going now if we don't come up with an
That's
answer.
how I got on the planning commission 20 years ago. I ran on a campaign for council, and of course lost to sell the telephone system. My punishment was to serve 4 years on the planning commission.
Don't tell me about that form of punishment. I don't want to hear about that.
An in-depth analysis of these utilities might well lead to a well-researched, balanced recommendation to sell. But I just don't see that the Charter Commission is going to have time to make those judgments.
No, see, that's a couple of year study. Yeah.
Well, would public be willing to defer to a panel, you think?
Well, it would be their elected representatives who would make the ultimate decision based on the recommendations of the panel. I mean, the panel wouldn't decide. They would recommend to the assembly.
Gee, I wish I didn't come here today. Now I'd like to rewrite the whole damn charter.
Well, we'll make the chairman of the committee to do it, Fred.
to rewrite the charter. Take out community councils and
I don't think
take out the
you're
mayor's form.
not gonna form a new, you're not gonna sell the city utilities today or tomorrow or through this charter. So you're gonna have to provide something for interim.
Well, I
If
really,
you have a question about whether it should be turned over as happens basically in annexation anyway, both assets and liabilities.
We should take that paragraph and sit down as a charter commission, rework it, look at
I think if you
Yeah.
panel,
Not good.
if you set up a panel, you've got to set up some parameters that panel's going to work within and time frame, because otherwise you beg the question and you're going to have problems.
Frank, is there any way that we could word that section to say that the utilities will be handled just as they would as if the city were annexing the rest of the bowl?
Oh, that would be.
Oh, that'd be a dirty word.
Oh.
That'd be a dirty word, annexing.
Charter, Mary.
That'd scare everybody. That'd make them run from the charter if that word appeared in it.
Well,
I'm not sure it would.
Oh, yeah, that word annexing is well, out in the borough, your people, those folks out there, when they get
But
there,
if
they,
you turn around and say to them that, like the mayor is proposing to have the borough vote against the charter again, when he says that the profits will be reserved to the city when they feel that they have been paying for the telephone utility for years, you see. So that is intended to make the borough vote against it, and then the mayor can still say that he was for it, though he's going to yell real loud.
You're a suspicious person.
I'm a real suspicious person today.
It's realistic in terms of the practical
Now-
animals that we
yeah,
are.
sure.
If you-
Politics, it's all part of the game.
If you tell the city man that the utilities are going to be
Give it away.
handled the same as if they annex the rest of the borough, they'll feel protected.
And yet, if you said to both of them, we're going to sell them, they'd be the happiest guys in the world, because most of the guys in the borough and the city are saying sell a damn thing.
No, they aren't.
Oh,
You're
yeah,
mistaken,
yeah.
Chris. I
There's
don't
quite,
think
there's
they
quite
are.
a feeling about selling those things.
I think you're mistaken.
Every time the unions get another raise, you hear a good round of applause from the people saying, let's get rid of them. They're giving the shop away.
well,
I think that the panel makes the most sense, and I think we've covered.
Well, it's the only way we can go under the conditions. I mean, it's been pointed out, we don't have the time. But I think we're going to have to redo that section on utilities. It isn't,
Well, the transition section needs a major looking at.
No, you know, a major overhaul.
yeah.
It wasn't too much time to spend on it.
Yes, there was, but the opinions were different.
There was quite a bit of time spent on the finance part, and that's probably the cleanest of the whole document, the transition section.
Because that utilities a can of worms, no matter how you try to tackle that thing. It comes up in your face.
incidentally, your relationship to the Borough Assembly from the standpoint of taxation as it stands now, you assess or the borough assesses?
They assess.
They assess. You determine the mill levy or the city? You relate that to the borough, and that's it. There's no argument, no squabble or anything.
They're a collection agency.
They're only a collection agency. This is not a fair question, but I'll ask you. How do you think that sort of an arrangement would work with the school district? They are an elected body like the city council. They're an anonymous overall agency.
Okay, I'll respond. In most parts of the United States, the school boards levy their own taxes. few places, state of Wisconsin, the Anchorage area, have gone this different route, which I tend to favor, which is that the school board develops its budget and then has to seek financing from what I regard as the senior governmental body. The educational process institutionally is among the more voracious in the country. I don't think the Assembly should have the power to look at items in the budget, because by so doing, they would constitute themselves as a Board of Education, and that's not what they are. But they do have the overview on the total financial picture of what the community should produce in the way of taxation. In that sense, in my view, they should have the responsibilities that they presently have in the Anchorage system.
Appreciate that comment. Been wandering around in my head, and I know we're going to get some talk from the school board about other things. I want to be satisfied.
Doug, in the other municipalities, the larger ones, do they use an ombudsman, to your knowledge? Is that an extensive use?
It is not an extensive use.
And how about community councils?
Starting to be. You see, what happened is we went through the Model Cities experience. 150 cities selected for the Model Cities program. This caught cities by surprise because they simply weren't used to working with people in the way that they got caught up in the Model Cities experience, and it really jarred them. Very good for them, by the way, because all of a sudden they were dealing with new power structures that previously had had no voice of any kind. Now all of a sudden they had to have these councils set up under the Model Cities structure. And, they had staff, and they made loud noises, and they shook things up. And people running governments didn't like it, or hated it. And then many of them perceived its value. And when Model Cities closed down, there were lots of cities that moved to keep that structure going and even to expand it. Now, in Cincinnati, I mentioned a little earlier, in Cincinnati, which is a large city, they have kept their Model City structure. They've expanded it. When they're in the process of preparing the city budget, they'll go into every one of those neighborhood councils and go over the budget as it relates to that particular area and get input. Now that's time consuming, but I like it. And the first experiences that came out of that was that people weren't yelling for wild-eyed radical stuff, but here they wanted more street lights, over here they wanted something better in the way of refuse collection and things of that type. I like it.
In these areas, in the model cities, did they come up with any criteria for size and definition of a community council? Like Jim says, his 3 people in his side of the arterial propose a community council.
I'm sure that must exist. I can't. You want me to look around and see what I can find?
I think it would be appreciating to us.
Yeah, at present,
I'll get that
it's
later.
awkward. It's one of the intangibles that makes it difficult.
Root beer?
Some more cheese?
No?
I'm sure I can put my hands on something that will help you.
Lisa Parker checked some at Berkeley and also got some of the Hawaiian experience, Honolulu experience at community college.
Well, see, there's a national organization that came into existence, which was an outgrowth of the Model Cities thing. I suspect they've got it pretty well organized.
And Sam, based upon what you've said, then you feel that community council is all right in that charter?
Oh, yeah. I simply say
But he didn't like that.
that the charter should say that they shall have such duties as the legislature may prescribe. Let's go with that.
Community council shall have such duties as the legislature by ordinance may prescribe.
And they may be entirely different 10 years from now than what they start off being.
That's more,
Stay the same.
that's more consistent with what we've tried to do throughout the charter, which is give the legislative body latitude.
And you see, the legislature could prescribe criteria and size or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That also stays in the realm of keeping it simple and easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what we were all trying to do.
See, I'm very sympathetic to the community council concept because what's going on in the country, and unification is a case in point, where all the pressures are for centralization of authority. It's the way we do things. It's the way we computerize. And now the contrary pressure is very real, and that's, you know, which is deliberately devised to ensure that people can have a piece of the action. And I think it's necessary. I think it's healthy. Takes a lot of time. It's going to cost money. But it's
In
good.
that regard, someone suggested that perhaps we should make our boards and commissions have more power, that they be more than advisory somehow. And it's frustrating, the comment was, to make all these kind of recommendations, and that's it. If they had no power, they were powerless. And then again, you have the legislature feeling that their power is being chopped off and sapped by all these other peripheral kinds of...
No, I'd have to go against our...
I think, Jim, that what you're talking about arose within the strong executive system where the boards and commissions are caught in the struggle between the mayor's staff and the legislative body. For a long time, the planning commission kept asking, whose commission are we? Are we the mayor's commission or the assembly's commission? And they've finally been told that they are the assembly's commission. And they're beginning to straighten themselves out. But
Well, yeah, there was a couple of examples last night, but on the right side of the group, but I can't remember his name now.
Augusta?
Harry...
No,
Harry Garrett? Harry Garrett.
yeah, he gave an example where he must serve on the we'll say,
Oh, no.
on some commission, so the building inspector is there to give advice and cram things down his throat that he don't want crammed on his throat. He doesn't like that. That sort of power exercise against him. That was the other side of the coin. And,
Was that a city commission?
it might have been a city.
Yeah.
The gentleman is on the city commission, but it is one that often works jointly with the borough commission.
I've never seen so many boards and commissions as we have up here. And this is
There's like 21 of them?
A lot of people to take care of.
And this is another thing I've found, unusual, not liked it. Now, typically where you have these advisory commissions and the city manager, form of government, they're advisory to the manager. The system they have here is so much better. They're advisory to the mayor and council. And I think they view this as a very important thing when they get on these boards.
Are they advisory to the mayor and council as policy advice or administrative function?
Well, it's very hard to divide these things lots of times, you know. Typically, lots of things that all have moving towards the council in terms of administrative reports will feed through these agencies that make their recommendation to the council.
Do you find it helpful to you in the functioning of the government and in your relationship with
I
the
have.
legislative body?
I have.
I remember at one point when I was very active back in the beginning of the bike trail, the bike day committee, I felt a bit like a ping pong ball because I was bounced back between the Parking and Traffic Commission, the Parks and Recreation Commission, and the council, and the administration. And we kept getting bounced from one to the other, not any one of them wanting to make a decision until the other one had said something first. And I think the city has cleared up some of those channels of communication. I guess the Parks Commission didn't want to say anything until they had a directive from the council. The council didn't want to give a directive till the commission had said something to them.
Well, government is business, and the city manager is big business, and I think all the input that a man can get to help him make a decision is good. But you don't need enough power that you can be, that you can't do what you think is necessary. You're the hired executive.
In the city, the mayor recommends to the council on the appointment of members of boards and commissions.
In practice, is there input from the council, or does he more or less do the majority of it?
Oh, I think we have so many, I think he does the majority, and I've never seen anybody turn anything down yet.
He does, though, speaking from recent experience, sound out the members of the council.
He does his homework before he appoints them.
Puts the
Sure,
name
yeah.
up, which is why.
You gotta condition them. Well, I gotta go move it. I got a meeting.
Fred?
Now, you say we've given the mayor a great deal of power.
Huh?
Are you working?
Are you also saying that you would prefer that we went council manager, full-time mayor, rather than the way we have it?
You know, given my lifelong career, I'm biased when I answer that question in the affirmative. I would not, under any conditions, come to one of your public hearings and say
Thank you, Doc.
because it would be construed as self-serving. But
Which is why I think we set this meeting down.
and I appreciate it. But I did see some real pitfalls in the process that you're talking about in this first charter that I wanted to mention to you.
Mary, you missed out in the beginning of the discussion, and it was most interesting in that there was a discussion about the imbalance of power built into the strong executive, which cuts.
Frank wasn't here, but I don't guess anybody was here.
Well, why don't you
Except you,
rediscuss
Sheriff.
it a little bit?
I go through it very
Doug,
quickly.
If you don't mind.
I'm
sorry.
Leave in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, it'll take me about 3 minutes. What bothered me when I read the charter, that it struck me as downgrading and weakening the legislature.
In what sense?
Okay. You're going to set up a strong mayor who will be the chief executive officer with veto power. And he'll control all of the administration apparatus. And he'll have his chief aide, who he'll call whatever, chief administrative officer or manager, and all department heads. They will serve his pleasure.
But they have to be approved of by
The department heads do not, do they?
I
We-
thought we did.
We,
I thought we had
yes,
it in
we
there.
did
Yeah.
put that in, but as a matter of principle, that seldom has a long-lasting effect, because at the beginning, before they begin doing anything, they're approved, and
And you don't always know what they're gonna work out as.
All right, then I made the remark that you'd created a position with the powers of a governor.
In a way.
But the difference between the governor and this mayor is that the latter is not held in check by an organized opposition political party. And that's the real control on the strong executive government. In other words, I came to the conclusion reading this,
I guess that's what Florins are for.
that you had designed a system which was geared to a partisan structure.
I don't think about that a little bit.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I agree with that.
Now, you've also created, as is true with the governor, a cabinet system, which institutionalizes a turnover of cabinet officers when the mayor leaves.
By the fact that the department heads are appointed by him.
Yeah.
and
No.
it did in fact happen when Roderick came in, that there was
Oh.
a turnover.
Thank goodness.
And it also raises the specter of powerful pressures on the mayor to reward political supporters with these top jobs. Let me finish.
Which
All right.
we-
Now,
which
wait a
we've
minute.
not
Wait, let me ask a question in relation to that. I can hear that one, and that one does worry me. Is there any way that shouldn't we write in something in relation to qualifications for department head jobs that do require professional qualifications in that?
I think we should.
Line.
But that I think is
So that it
by
isn't
breach
curious.
more than,
It's unenforceable.
and the deputies are the ones that have the qualifications, and the department heads are the political animals.
Now, the way I categorize the mayor, Mary, in a setting such as we have here, he is Mr. Outside in terms of the jobs that are on him. He is terribly busy in terms of external relationships.
Right.
Mr. Inside, then, in the system I represent, is the city manager. And in the system we're talking about here would be the mayor's alter ego,
Right.
who would come and go with the mayor.
Mhm.
A very powerful and very insulated position. Mayor's too busy to be the business officer of the community because he has too many other things to do, and the chances are he hasn't been trained in that way anyway. So the other fellow who is not very well known and is insulated is, by virtue of his alter ego position, the manager of a budget, of a combined operating budget, which today is $100 million.
Mhm.
And he will exercise executive authority over, as it stands today, better than 2,000 people. It's a very powerful position. Now, the one thing that concerned me,
What do you propose might be done about it, Doug? This is,
well, let me get, I just got two more points. A thing that concerned me, and it may be what you want to do. As I read this, it institutionally places the mayor, no matter who he is, in an adversary role with the legislature.
yes, it does.
All right. Now, the administration is going to control 90% of all the facts to the departments and so on. The legislature will get only those facts which supports the mayor's position. Let's assume that will freedom they have. In states where the bureaucracy has dominated the legislature through the control tax. Some states have hired staffs for the legislature. I predict that this will happen in Anchorage, that in time,
In time.
the
I'm
legislature
trying,
will
I'm
want
sure there
will
will
want
be
its
some.
own staff. Now, my overview, and I'm finished now, is that I think that this sharply tips the scales towards executive domination and institutionalizes a weak legislative arrangement. And I regard that as an imbalance.
Well,
About that a little bit. Mary, in terms of what I see in the borough, you are the person who spends the most time, from my observation, in the daily information gathering business of government.
I'm known as the thorn.
Okay. But I suspect that some others either are not oriented this way or don't have the time to do it for
Both.
one reason.
Both.
And therefore, only because you do spend so much time do you get the information you get. And that as a body, it doesn't happen.
And it gets spread because I get it.
But you know that if you weren't in there ferreting out a lot of that information that the legislative body is getting because you're there ferreting it out, it wouldn't come through.
Occasionally it would not. And we're, Jack, really antagonistic to my getting the information. I wouldn't get it.
You're more philosophically in tune to Jack than you might be to some different
All right.
man.
Now, were Jack philosophically not wanting me to get the information, I'd have a hell of a time getting it.
He could close it
They
off.
just close the door. I mean, he'd
I
just
could
say,
have
you know.
a hell of a time getting it.
Now, this was when I was referring to Frank, when I was
And,
chairman of the Health and Education Committee in the legislature. The other party was in power and ordered the Commissioner of Education to give only such committee information as they chose.
All right, I'm hearing what he's saying real strongly. And yet, I'm going back to the other side of it. If we went to the other forum that he is more familiar with, I still tend to feel that the manager-council forum is more apropos where the needs in the community are more stable, where they aren't quite so diverse in nature as they are here. Now, what I want to ask Doug, and I think he can hear me on that one too, how do you propose that we could give the balance a little bit more without, can we come somewhere between the two?
How about the community councils with the council manager form?
I don't think that's the answer. Is there some between form? I was hearing you because if Jack said no and Harry said no,
You'd be up a creek.
I'd have a hell of a time getting information.
But if you were in a council manager form and the manager said no, and said no to you and several of the other legislators, as a manager, you would be out.
Well, when a manager in a council manager form, when a manager loses his rapport or contact with even less than half the council, he's just about done, is he not?
What's the proportion? I guess this is really the question I'm getting around to. Because we could put into this thing that this manager is fireable by the assembly in a certain proportion.
Then you've just made a mess of the government.
I'm not sure you can. What would happen with that, Doug?
Well,
Philosophically.
with you created something and struck it down at the same time. You said that the mayor is the chief executive officer. This other guy is just his shadow. It so happened you created an awful powerful shadow.
Well,
What you do
well,
is you
she's
get him
talking
to hire a
indirectly
Nevish.
City council manager form.
No, I don't think so.
Well, you can't afford to have a Nevish.
You weren't talking about the manager form, were you?
No.
She was talking about the legislature firing the chief administrative officer. But he's the mayor.
I'm talking about his alter ego, because the alter ego is bound to be there much more than he is.
All he does, his power flows from the fact that he
That he
acts
acts for the mayor, that's right.
I mean, Mary, it's always puzzled me why you would favor the strong executive over the council manager if you favor having individual voices in the community. The mayor is elected at large and represents one voice, one philosophical trend. And he dilutes the power of the legislature, which represents the various factions of the community. So that as someone who represents a diverse interest in the community in terms of the hillside area, the voice of the hillside people is diluted if the mayor is not philosophically in tune with the people in that area.
I have a question.
Well, I'm going to think about that one a little more, but he's right that if the mayor, if his alter ego intentionally shut off the information to the legislature, the only recourse to the legislature would be to have its own staff, and that could be held for expenses.
Or to cut off appropriations.
Well, but you can only cut appropriations off once a year, and that's not often enough.
And that just messes up the whole
That is not
government.
enough.
And then people get mad at the legislature or the legislative body for cutting off the departments so that the roads are getting toppled.
That is not enough. That is not enough. That
Doug,
is
I have a
not
question
enough.
about the use of community councils that bugged me a little bit, especially with this one we have in South Edition. It has been my feeling, and I have not gone into it and checked it out, but that it is supported by the borough financially.
No,
Supported.
it's not.
It's not. Okay.
I
Is
like
it
that.
supported staff-wise by the borough?
No, it is not. What else do you want to know?
In no way. By the
Well,
staff-wise.
yes and no. I think that we,
Pay the coordinator?
no, we don't even pay the coordinator. The coordinator is paid by grant,
Well, it,
not from us.
yeah, but one day,
We didn't pay for the grant. That went outside and they got it from some sort of action group. They got a grant for the coordinator. But
Once you
the
set up-
borough does allow some money, I think it is, for a little publicity within the community council.
For advertising public hearings, their meetings and things.
That sort of thing. But it's minuscule.
my question came to this, is to what extent will community council be used or controlled or function as an arm, not of the legislature, not of the executive, but of the bureaucracy? The bureaucracy determines if they don't like something. And you utilize the community council to put their point across on a one-sided basis.
I don't think that happens. You have too many people who are... You think that your community council has been used in that way.
I do.
And you have a sacred cow.
I
Well,
know.
I have a say, no, it's symptomatic, if that's true. It's symptomatic, and it,
All right. Now, Frank, what you're telling me is that the reasons for these community councils that you're hearing is to get across comprehensive plan, are you not? I thought I heard you.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, in the same sense that I...
Yes, you're right, but not directly. The community council idea was proposed along with comprehensive plans as a method that the people in the area could get the sort of land use planning that the people in the area wanted, rather than the people in the other areas of town enforcing upon them what they wanted, sort of idea. Yes, that sort of idea was put out in the meetings where they were trying to get the input in relation to the proposed land use plan as to what the community wanted. You're right. And it was given out by staff in the planning department. You're right. But as far as financially backing them in any manner, no.
Well, you see, to me, then, it was obvious, pretty obvious in our community council that those people who seemed to have formed it seemed to have certain affinity for the planning department, and were probably recruited
Those
through that.
people that formed it, some of them were on the mayor's comprehensive goals and objectives committee.
Well,
And through their work with the goals and objective committee and going out to the neighborhoods when they were trying to come up with a land use plan. Yes, that is part of the way it got out. You're right. They tried to propose that one be formed out in my area, and the Home and Landowners Association says, but we're already doing that. Why do we need to be recognized formally? If we have to be recognized formally, we can't have any standard precepts as to what we are standing for to limit our membership to the sort of beliefs that we really want to believe in. So we won't form a community council. We'll just go ahead and do everything else that we've been doing anyhow. And it's had over 800 membership. But none of the rest of these community councils, as far as I know, are more than about 30 or 40. So we got a bigger community council out yonder that's not formally recognized than they got anywhere else in town. And have had it since right shortly after I was elected. That's when they got together to back what I've been trying to back.
I'd rather fight with the crony council than with the bureaucracy council.
There's a little bit to that, Frank. But you see, there had been this sort of thing that is really, truly the sort of community council. We've had them, but not formally recognized in the Anchorage area for years and years, because we've had homeowners associations and this sort of thing. Don't you think that? And that's really the community council. And you can't tell a community what size the area is going to be that's going to be interested in whatever the main interest of the moment is.
We better let Doug go. Do you have any other things you haven't told us you want to tell us at this
I don't
point?
think so. I continue to admire how seriously you're taking your work and how much time you're spending on it.
There is a point we may be over that apex. People are starting to tire.
We got so tired that we got snappy with each other last week.
That was a meeting I missed, and I hear that it was.
I heard
tell me
it was
that
bad.
We got
I missed.
snappy with
Well,
each other
it's
last
been one
week.
to a bit.
That can happen.
Yeah.
You know, the pressures, I think what happened, as best I can analyze it from somebody that's seen too bad at the time, was that the pressures came off suddenly. They'd accomplished, gotten to a point virtually that the pressure was suddenly off for a moment.
But,
A lot of things came
but
out.
those of us who really got upset hadn't had the pressures off because we were in 2 or 3 other things that were also at an apex at the moment.
Borough budget, do you think like that?
Borough budget and AMU and the state capital site and a few other little odds and ends were all mixed into the peripheries.
Your own personal world.
Well, you've got a very good skeleton there, and there are a couple of things that, as I stated what I feel about the structure, which is extraordinarily important.
All right, I've got some questions on the other side of the structure. I haven't finished it. If you've got a few more minutes.
Okay.
The problems that I see on the contrary side, say we've got a city council and a manager.
Okay.
And say instead of having a city council that is looking for uniform answers, we have a city council that is very divergent in feeling.
Very good.
All right. These divergent feelings of this city council, because the area is divergent, and gosh, we've got that here, if nothing else. All right. They come on to the manager, and they say, this is what I want, manager. And the manager's here trying to pull them in together to go some way.
Yeah, come here.
All right? It's impossible to go all of those ways at once. And they go around the manager to the heads of the departments because they've got to be responsive to the legislature as well. And they get the heads of the departments going in all of these ways.
See, that doesn't happen under the manager system
What prevents that?
because all of the department heads are appointed by me and are responsible to me and serve at my pleasure. Now, there's another very basic difference between the two systems we talked about. In the managerial side of things, what you attempt to do is to set up your policy structure. And here you have all of your swirlings of controversy, and as it should, until some kind of policy is formulated. The manager then serves as a bridge between this level of activity and the professional level, which is constituted to put
do
that
the job.
policy in effect.
To do the job.
Now, there is a guiding rule. Now, the department heads are insulated from politics, if I may use that word.
Okay.
They are insulated from politics. I dare say that if you would go to the department heads in the city, individually, I have talked with them, that to a person, they would say that they like the system they're working on because it enhances their professionalism. They were picked on that basis, and they serve on that basis. I would wager that to a person, they would say, I fear what will happen to me under this system. With a changing
Wanting to go all of these different directions, and that they really, with as much divergent feeling as there is in this community today, that they won't get somewhere here together with it. And we still have, and that we don't have somebody here that makes the administration really go in one direction. In other words, if the manager is not hearing a united tune, in this case, what we have now out there, if the assembly really is giving a wide tune like this, the mayor goes on his own. But if we're going this, he definitely goes with us. is when we get out here, and we really don't have.
Well, that's true, and that's the democratic process, but council and the assembly has to speak. And it's going to be by split vote on many occasions. That's the policy. And that gets done.
Well, I'll think about it a little bit more.
Well, I've enjoyed visiting with you folks.
Appreciate it.
Okay, go hear the traffic of your city. I'm amazed, I live on a quiet street and the traffic levels here, it's just, you know,
Those are
really
major
made me realize
arterial.
how we've grown.
See,
We
we
live
work
in the back.
back rooms.
You know, this crazy business that we have of how the state pays for the maintenance of certain streets. And nobody knows which is which. I've been so embarrassed about this C Street, you know, which is,
That's in State Street.
well, yeah, but who knows that?
I can tell you that.
They're all
The
blaming the
citizens-
city.
Mary and I got into it a little while back. I went and damn borough maintained 32nd. I gotta pave it first. And it's a block long, that block.
Anyway, I'm pleased to report that the state is fixing C Street today.
Isn't that nice?